My mother-in-law smiled at my 7-year-old daughter and said, "You know, sweetheart, some little girls are just built bigger than others. It's okay." My daughter looked up at me with those big brown eyes, confused. She didn't fully understand what had just been said to her, but I did. I smiled back at my mother-in-law, let's call her what she was, my husband's mother, and I said nothing. That was 3 years ago. I wish I could say that was the worst thing she ever did. It wasn't. I need to go back a little further so you understand how we got to Christmas Eve last year, because nothing happens in a vacuum, and what she did that night didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of small cruelties that everyone in that family had decided to call love. My husband and I have been together for 6 years, married for 4. We have 2 kids, Mia, who just turned 10, and our son Eli, who's 7. From the outside, my in-laws look like the perfect family. Big house in the suburbs, nice cars. The kind of people who send Christmas cards with a professional photo every year, everyone in matching cream-colored sweaters, everyone smiling just the right amount. My mother-in-law runs that family the way a director runs a film set. Everything is about image. Everything is about how things look. And for years, I tried to fit into that picture. I really did. But Mia never quite fit. Mia is the kind of kid who talks too loud when she gets excited. She asks 100 questions at dinner. She laughs at her own jokes before she even finishes telling them. She's the most alive human being I've ever met. And I mean that. There is nothing wrong with my daughter. There is nothing wrong with her body, her personality, her volume, her energy. She is exactly who she's supposed to be. My mother-in-law disagreed. It started with little comments. "Mia, sit still. Mia, indoor voice. Mia, don't eat so fast." Always in that gentle, concerned tone that made it impossible to call out directly. When I tried once, early on, my husband told me I was being oversensitive. His mother was just old-fashioned. She meant well. I want to be clear. My husband is not a bad person. But he grew up in that house, and when you grow up in a house where someone controls everything through a smile, you stop being able to see the bars on the windows. So I managed it. I limited our visits. I kept them short. I made sure Mia was never alone with her grandmother for long. I told myself I had it under control. And then came Christmas. My mother-in-law had been planning this particular Christmas gathering for months. She had a new house. They'd moved in October, bigger place, finished basement, the kind of home that exists specifically to host events in. She wanted everyone there, both of my husband's brothers with their families, the aunts, the cousins, neighbors she was close with. She made it sound like the event of the year. I almost said we couldn't make it. Mia had just recovered from a bad cold, and honestly, I was exhausted, and some part of me, the part that had watched Mia shrink slightly every time she was around that woman, wanted to just stay home, order pizza, and watch a movie with my kids. But my husband wanted to go. His grandmother was going to be there, 91 years old, and we hadn't seen her in over a year. I said, fine. I told myself one night, we'd get through one night. We got there around 5. The house was beautiful, I'll give her that. Garlands on the staircase, candles everywhere, the smell of something good coming from the kitchen. Mia ran in ahead of me and immediately went looking for her cousins. Eli held my hand for about 30 seconds before spotting the dessert table and forgetting I existed. The first hour was fine. I got a glass of wine, talked to my husband's aunt, who I actually like. Mia was running around with the other kids laughing, being herself. I started to relax. That was my first mistake. Around 6:30, my mother-in-law gathered all the grandchildren, there were 7 of them total, into the living room for what she called a special Christmas activity. She'd set up this little craft table, ornaments, glitter, paint, ribbon. The kids were thrilled. Mia especially. She loves making things. I was in the kitchen with some of the other adults, maybe 20 feet away, and I could hear the kids laughing. I could hear Mia's laugh specifically. She has this distinctive laugh, loud and unself-conscious, and I've always loved it. Then I heard my mother-in-law's voice cut through the noise, sweet as syrup. "Oh, Mia, look at the mess you're making. Can't you be more careful?" I set my glass down. "The other children are managing just fine. Why do you always have to be so—" I was already moving toward the doorway. "Messy? You know what? Here, let me help you." And before I reached the doorway, before I could get there, I heard my daughter go completely silent. I turned the corner and I stopped. My mother-in-law had taken the small cup of red craft paint, the kind meant for painting ornaments, and she had poured it over Mia's head, over her hair, her face, the white sweater she was so proud of that morning. She was laughing. My mother-in-law was laughing, and I watched two of the other adults in the room smile uncomfortably, like maybe it was a joke, like maybe they were supposed to laugh too. Mia was standing completely still, red paint dripping down her forehead, eyes wide, not crying, just frozen, shocked into silence in a way I had never seen from my loud, laughing girl. For a second I couldn't move either. Some part of my brain was refusing to process what I had just seen. Then Mia blinked, and a drop of paint rolled toward her eye, and she flinched. That unlocked something in me. I crossed the room in about 4 steps. I grabbed Mia and pulled her against me, and I looked directly at my mother-in-law and I said, very quietly, "What did you just do?" She was still smiling. Smile slightly smaller now, but still there. It was just a little prank. For the video. It's funny, she had her phone out. She had been filming it. "Delete it," I said. "Oh, don't be so, delete it right now." She pulled the phone back closer to her chest, like I was going to take it. "You are completely overreacting. It's washable paint. It comes right out." I was just having a little fun. Everyone does these things with kids. And that was when my father-in-law, who had just walked in from the other room, took one look at Mia and one look at me and said, "I will never forget this as long as I live. Let's not ruin Christmas over a little paint." I looked at my daughter. She was shaking. She still hadn't made a sound. Paint was in her hair, on her cheek, dangerously close to her right eye. I turned to my father-in-law. I said, "Your wife just poured paint on my child's face." He gave me the kind of look you give someone who is being unreasonable. She was joking. I picked Mia up, all 60 pounds of her. She's 10 years old. I haven't carried her like that in years, and I carried her to the bathroom. I locked the door. I ran warm water, and I started cleaning her face, her hair, her neck, and the whole time I was doing it, I was talking to her quietly, telling her she was okay, telling her I had her, telling her she didn't do anything wrong. She still didn't cry right away. That's the part that gutted me most. She held it together until I was wiping the paint off her cheek with a warm cloth, and then she looked at me in the mirror and she said, "Mommy, does Grandma not like me?" I had to breathe through my nose for a moment before I could answer. I said, "Baby, this is not about you. This is about Grandma. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why did she do that?" I didn't have an answer for her. I cleaned her up as best I could. Her sweater was ruined. There was paint in her hair that was going to take a real wash to get out. I wrapped her in my cardigan and I held her for a few minutes, just held her, and then I sent her a text to my husband. He was still somewhere in the house that said, "Come to the upstairs bathroom now." He knocked 2 minutes later. I let him in. He saw Mia in my cardigan with her hair still damp and a faint pink tinge at her hairline, and to his credit, his face dropped immediately. "What happened?" I told him. I was very calm. I laid it out factually, everything, including the phone. He went completely still. Then he said, "I'll talk to her." I said, "That's not enough." He looked at me. I looked at him. And something passed between us in that moment. Some understanding that we were at a turning point, that what he did next mattered in a way that couldn't be taken back. He said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I want us to take our kids and leave, and I want you to make it clear why." He nodded. No argument. No, let's not make a scene. Just nodded. We found Eli first, got him into his coat before he fully understood what was happening. Then we went downstairs together. My mother-in-law was in the kitchen with her back to us, telling a story to someone, laughing. My father-in-law was pouring himself a drink. My husband said, loud enough for the room to hear, "We're leaving." His mother turned around. Her eyes went to Mia, then to me, then to him. "What?" "No, it's Christmas Eve. You can't just, you poured paint on Mia's face," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just stated it like a fact. "We're leaving." The room got very quiet. "I was joking," she said, and her voice had a new edge now. You're all being incredibly dramatic. I've seen this girl act worse at this very table. Don't, my husband said. She stopped. Don't say another word about my daughter, he said. We left. We got both kids in the car. Eli was confused and asking questions. Mia was quiet, pressed against my side in the back seat while I buckled her in. My husband drove. Nobody said much on the way home, after the kids were in bed. Mia had a real cry in the shower, the kind that comes out after the shock wears off, and I stayed in her room until she fell asleep. My husband and I sat at the kitchen table and talked for a long time. It was one of the most honest conversations we'd had in years. He said things he'd never said before, about growing up in that house, about the things he'd normalized, about watching the same kinds of comments directed at his mother, at his brother's wives, at anyone who didn't perform the way she wanted. He said he was sorry it had taken something this visible, this undeniable, for him to see it clearly. I believed him. I still believe him. The next morning, I took Mia to urgent care, not because I thought she was seriously hurt, but because I needed it documented. I needed a medical record. The doctor noted the residual irritation near her right eye from chemical exposure. Craft paint, yes, but still. He filed an incident report. He strongly recommended I contact Child Protective Services to make a report as well. I did. I'm not going to walk you through every detail of what came next, because some of it is still ongoing. But here's what I will tell you. My mother-in-law called the next day. She didn't apologize. She said she was disappointed in how we'd handled things, that we had humiliated her in front of her guests, and that Mia's behavior had been provoking all evening. That last word, provoking, I wrote it down the moment I hung up. My father-in-law sent a text to my husband saying we owed his wife an apology. 2 of the other adults who had been in that room when it happened told other family members that I had screamed at my mother-in-law and attacked her, neither of which happened, as there were 7 children and several other adults present who saw exactly what occurred. Here's the part of the story where I need to tell you something about my financial situation, because it matters to what happened next. 3 years ago, my husband and I gave my in-laws a significant amount of money. It was framed as a gift at the time, but the understanding, spoken clearly by my mother-in-law, was that it was a loan, and that one day when they were ready to sell their previous home, they would pay it back. We had that conversation in writing, text messages, emails. My mother-in-law had said explicitly that she didn't want to involve lawyers because we're family. I had kept every single message. I called a lawyer on December 26th. By January 3rd, we had sent a formal demand letter for repayment of the loan, with all documentation attached. My mother-in-law called my husband 17 times in 1 week. I also sent a letter through our lawyer, not directly, informing my in-laws that we would be limiting all contact between them and our children indefinitely, and that any attempt to contact our children directly or to discuss this matter with our children would be treated as harassment. The CPS report didn't result in a removal or anything like that. I want to be transparent about that. But it is on record. And the caseworker who came to our home was very clear that what had been done to Mia, regardless of what it was framed as, met the definition of physical abuse of a child. My mother-in-law does not know about the CPS report. She found out about the lawyer. She told several family members that I had destroyed the family and that I was vindictive and unstable. One of my husband's brothers reached out to us and said he thought we were taking it too far. My husband told him very calmly that his daughter had chemicals poured on her face and that he would take it exactly as far as he needed to. I've had people ask me if I feel guilty, people who know the story, who are on my side, who still wonder out loud if maybe some of what I did was more than was necessary. Here's what I tell them. My daughter asked me if her grandmother didn't like her. She's 10 years old. She spent 3 years absorbing comments about her body, her behavior, her personality from a woman who smiled while delivering every single one. And on Christmas Eve, in front of 7 children and multiple adults, that woman poured paint on her face and filmed it for content. There is no version of too far in my response to that. There is no scale on which my daughter's experience needs to be balanced against my mother-in-law's feelings about how I handled it. What I did was document everything. Protect my child medically and legally. Make sure there was a record. Remove my children from an unsafe relationship. and hold someone financially accountable for a debt they owed us, because I was no longer willing to let money be a reason to keep quiet. My husband and I are okay. Better than okay, honestly. There's something that happens when a crisis forces you to finally say the true things. It's terrible in the moment, and then, slowly, it makes everything more solid. We go to therapy now, both together and separately. He has had some very hard conversations with himself about what he witnessed growing up and what he carried into our marriage. I'm proud of him for that. Mia is okay. She had a few weeks of being quieter than usual, which is almost funny to say because Mia is never quiet, but she bounced back. We talked about it honestly, at her level. I told her that some adults don't know how to be kind, and that it was never her job to make those adults comfortable. She told me she didn't want to see her grandmother anymore. I told her she didn't have to. She seemed relieved. Kids shouldn't have to feel relieved about not seeing a grandparent. That's not normal. That's not something to manage around or explain away. That's a sign that something was wrong long before Christmas Eve. The loan repayment is still being negotiated. My mother-in-law offered half and called it generous. Our lawyer is not done. I don't know if my in-laws and I will ever have a relationship again. I'm not going to say I hope we don't, because I don't think that's true. Some part of me still grieves the version of that family I thought I was marrying into, but I know with complete certainty that I will never again put my daughter in a room with a woman who sees her as a problem to manage. Not for the holidays, not for appearances, not for anyone's comfort except my daughter's. The last thing Mia said to me the night of Christmas Eve, right before she fell asleep, was this: "Mommy, you came really fast." She meant when she was standing there with pain on her face and everyone was laughing. She meant that I crossed that room fast. I said, "Of course I did, baby. That's my job." She nodded like that made complete sense, and she closed her eyes. That's the whole story. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently, and honestly, not much. Maybe I would have moved faster. Maybe I would have called the doctor that same night instead of waiting until morning, but the core of it, what I chose to do and why, I do it the same way every time. Here's what I've come to understand about that night and about everything that came after. People who operate the way my mother-in-law does, through small, sustained cruelties disguised as humor, as concern, as love, they count on one thing more than anything else. They count on you wanting to keep the peace more than you want to protect yourself. Or your child. They've usually been doing it long enough that everyone around them has already made that calculation and decided the peace was worth it. That's how it runs for years. That's how Mia ended up absorbing comments about her body and her laugh and her energy from the time she was 7 years old, and somehow that became normal, something to manage, something to explain to a little girl who didn't do anything wrong. What changed on Christmas Eve wasn't that my mother-in-law finally went too far. She'd been going too far for years. What changed was that she did it in a way that was impossible to reframe. Paint on a child's face is not a misunderstanding. Paint near a child's eye is not a matter of perspective. And the moment I saw Mia standing there, frozen with red running down her forehead, something in me was done negotiating with that reality. I think about Mia asking me if her grandmother didn't like her. 10 years old. Trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, because children always look inward first. They assume the problem is them. That's not weakness. That's just how children are wired. They trust the adults around them to be the stable ones. When those adults fail them, kids absorb it as a personal deficiency. That's what years of those comments had done quietly, underneath all the holiday dinners and Christmas cards and matching sweaters. The call I made to the lawyer, the urgent care visit, the CPS report, none of that was revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I've had people frame it that way, like I was being calculated or vindictive. I was being a mother. Those are two completely different things. The documentation, the records, the formal demand letter, those were tools. They exist for exactly this kind of situation. Using them isn't cruelty. Refusing to use them when your child has been harmed, when there is a paper trail of a debt being used as leverage over your silence, that would have been the real failure. There's something I've come to believe firmly, not from anything anyone told me, but just from living this. The people who tell you that you're overreacting are almost always the people who benefit from your silence. That's not a coincidence. It's a system. And the only way out of that system is to stop caring more about their comfort than about your own clarity. Mia is loud again. Her laugh fills up rooms again. She asked me last week if she could take an art class, the kind with real paint, and I signed her up without hesitating for a second. That's what I needed to see. Not my mother-in-law's apology, which hasn't come, and not the resolution of the loan negotiation, and not any grand acknowledgement from the family members who stood in that room and smiled uncomfortably and said nothing. Just Mia, wanting to make things again. That's enough. That's the whole point.